Hello. This week, the spotlight has returned to Ukraine after Kyiv orchestrated an audacious series of drone attacks deep inside Russia. They also covertly targeted the Kerch Bridge in Crimea. We then had that underwhelming second round of talks in Istanbul and another call between Trump and Putin. We'll be answering all your questions today with our expert panel.
I'm Vitaly Shevchenko.
And I'm Lyse Doucet in the Ukrainecast studio.
And I'm Paul Adams in Kyiv.
And I'm Lucy Hockings. Welcome to Ukrainecast.
Ukrainecast from BBC News.
Well, let's start with that attack that stunned the world. I mean, not only stunned the world, impressed the world as well. Operation Spiderweb. We'll talk about the implications in a minute. But before the world found out that that attack had taken place, we had a question in all the way from New Zealand from Sharon, who said, one topic I would like to know more about is Ukrainian capabilities to defensively strike inside Russia. Zelensky has repeatedly said that the war should be felt where it came from. There are rarely reports in the mainstream media about Ukrainian defensive actions on Russian territory. Now, Sharon, for all the details and all of you on how Spiderweb was carried out, do make sure you go to the Ukrainecast episode that we did on Tuesday. It's on our feed. But let's talk more about Spiderweb, though, now that we're a few days on, and what it tells us about Ukraine's tactics inside Russia going forward. Paul, do you think we've got more to come?
I think we do. In fact, President Zelensky has hinted as much. He talked about a series of operations. You know, a few days ago, all the talk was of Russia's anticipated summer offensive, and an offensive which actually kind of is underway in certain areas, if you look at what's going on close to Sumy in the northeast of the country. But now, since the weekend, it's all been about what Ukraine is up to with Operation Spiderweb, with the attack on the Kerch Bridge, with another thing that went largely unreported, which was a Ukrainian hack of the computer systems of the Tupolev aircraft manufacturer. But apparently they made off with a huge amount of data. So Ukraine is really keen to show that it is creative, that it has regained the momentum. And, you know, quite apart from the sheer kind of military physical impact of all of this, and, you know, let's not kind of beat about the bush. The attack on those air bases across Russia was a truly spectacular operation, which will go down in the annals of modern military history and will probably be the subject of novels and movies in the future. It is just gobsmacking in its audacity. It's right up there with the Israeli use of exploding pagers to kill members of Hezbollah last year. A really extraordinary operation. But quite apart from the kind of military purpose of it all, if you think back to whenever it was, February, when President Zelensky went and visited Donald Trump in the Oval Office, and they had that dreadful encounter. And one of Donald Trump's lines then was, "You've got no cards." Well, if you look at the memes that have exploded onto social media here in Ukraine since the weekend, that subject keeps coming back. There are pictures of President Zelensky wearing a whole suit made of playing cards. He's been called the king of drones. It just goes on and on and on. It recalls to me the explosion of delight and humour that accompanied the first Ukrainian attack on the Kerch Bridge back in 2022. So it's a real kind of morale boost, but it is also a way of saying to the world and to the Americans, do not for a second think that we are done here. We have plenty of cards to play, and you don't know quite when and how we're going to play them.
Lyse, that imagery that Paul is sharing with us, I mean, I have to give you a chance to reflect on it, because he said the attack was gobsmacking in its audacity.
Yes,
that
reminded
language,
us.
I mean, it's incredible, isn't it? People were so surprised, so impressed right around the world by what was achieved.
Well, I think it just, none of us are military planners, but if we had one here, they would tell you that war is not just about metal, as in METAL, of the tanks and the warplanes. It's also about the metal, METTLE, of the people. And this is a real boost to Ukrainians who, quite frankly, are living through hell. And Paul knows night after night the drone attacks, which seem to have no end. But also, it is a psychological boost to Ukraine. I mean, bear in mind that Ukraine, in the first months, indeed the first years of the war, kept battling against Western leaders who said, no, don't use long-range missiles, don't strike inside Russia, you're going to escalate the war. And then there's been many surprises, but one of the big ones regarding Russia was then they went deep into Russian territory and took territory. And at the time it was said, well, that may have been a strategic blunder, but tactically, again, they caught Russia off guard. And I think it's also to send a message to Russians, to take the war to Russians so that they feel the pain. And even though Russia is not by any means a democracy, that, people can express their discontent. And so, as Paul said, this spectacular operation gives them cards and also underlines that, whether or not the West keeps fighting, Ukraine is preparing for the long run. And yes, as Paul said too, they're believed to have other sharp tools in their toolbox.
Great. Well, let's have another question.
Hi Ukrainecast, this is Phil in Suffolk. Can you update as to the usefulness of the UK-supplied Dragonfire laser prototype that was given to Ukraine about a year ago for them to test? Thanks, and keep up the good work.
Thanks, Phil. Do you have an answer for him, Paul?
Well, it's not quite clear what, if anything, has been given to Ukraine. People may be wondering what this technology is. Well, the use of lasers to shoot down drones and even ballistic missiles is a really hot topic among the world's militaries at the moment. All sorts of people are trying to develop them. The Israelis have got their own program. Britain, as you've just heard, has its own program, which is, by the way, not due to be deployed until around 2027 at the earliest, probably deployed on British warships. And it is thought that at some point Britain may have shared with Ukraine a prototype or may have shown the kind of basic outlines of a plan. So it's thought that Ukrainians either have some rough version of what the British are working on or perhaps have developed their own. But it is clearly something that both sides would find extraordinarily useful at a time when drone warfare is accounting for, frankly, the overwhelming majority of incidents along the battlefront. Drones are just incredibly important, and we obviously saw that with the attack on the air bases. But the use of drones along the front lines is another very, very crucial aspect of this war. It was reported not that long ago that the Russians were using a Chinese version of the same piece of equipment, and that it had actually been used to bring down Ukrainian drones. So just as there is a race between the two sides to keep ahead of each other on drone technology, there is also a race to keep ahead of each other on the ways to combat drone technology. So we don't know exactly what the Ukrainians have. I think it's fair to say that its Western backers will be trying to make sure that this technology does reach the Ukrainians, or at least they can be helped to develop it, just to keep Ukraine very much in the game.
On paper, this is an amazing weapon that can transform the reality of warfare. But in reality, governments have been working on it for decades, 60 or 70 years, I think. And it's only last January that Britain's Dragonfire was first fired at a target. And it's supposed to be really good, able to hit a £1 coin from a distance of 1 kilometer. But have we actually heard of drones or planes or missiles being sliced in half over Ukraine? I really haven't. Russia claims to have a similar weapon called Peresvet, but again, I've not seen any examples of it actually being used. Ukraine says that they've got something called the Trizub, which is a laser weapon, which they suddenly announced last December. But again, it's not clear. Has it been tested? Has it been used? So it looks exciting, but in reality, it's still old-fashioned weapons like machine guns that they're using to shoot down drones or even nets. So I'm afraid we are a fair way away from seeing something like the Dragonfire being used in Ukraine on any scale.
Phil, thanks for that question. And our next one comes from John, who is in San Diego, who asks, since Russia's main source of income comes from oil and gas, presumably mostly transported by the Shadow Fleet, why haven't we been intercepting and confiscating these vessels? It seems like we could then resell the oil to pay for weapons for Ukraine. This is your kind of territory, Vitaly. You've done a lot of work around how the war is being financed in Russia.
Yes, oil and gas and fossil fuels, they account for about a third of Russia's state revenue, more than 60% of Russia's exports. So yes, you could say that this is largely what funds this war. So Shadow Fleet, what is it? It's basically a fleet of hundreds of tankers that are being secretly used to avoid Western sanctions imposed on Russian hydrocarbons. Why are they called shadow? Because they're difficult to find. The ownership and the management of these tankers are concealed. Even their names, they keep being changed. They keep being re-registered. Their crews, they keep meddling with their automatic identification systems to stop people from seeing where they go. So this is one reason why not many of them have been intercepted. Last May, when Estonia tried to inspect one such tanker called the Jaguar, Russia actually sent a fighter jet into Estonia's airspace, the first such instance when Russia tried to protect one of its shadow tankers. So a lot's going on there. But also, let's not forget that most of Russia's fossil fuels, they're being exported, bought and sold openly. China, India, and also the West. I wrote an article last week about how the West actually helps Russia pay for its war against Ukraine. To give you one example, last year, European member states, they spent 22 billion euros on Russian hydrocarbons. That's 4 billion euros more than they gave Ukraine in aid. Over the past 3 years, we're talking about tens of billions of euros paid by countries from NATO, sanctioning countries that have actually sanctioned Russia. They paid tens of billions of euros more to Russia than they gave Ukraine in aid. So you could say some of those missiles and drones and planes attacking Ukraine, they have been paid for by the West.
Vitaly, thank you. Let's bring in this question from Robin in Margate. Trump always chickens out is the phrase the US stock market attaches to Trump and his chaotic tariffs policies. Does it not equally apply to his attitude to Ukraine? His threat to withdraw from the peacekeeping process is surely taco writ large, and his reluctance to face up to Putin, criticise him, hold him to deadlines, etc. Someone should just drop into the conversation next time Ukraine comes up, the taco reference. It might just give him some backbone. Thanks for that, Robin. And before we answer, we should remind everyone of how President Trump responded when confronted with this nickname by a reporter.
Mr. President, Wall Street analysts have coined a new term called the taco trade. They're saying Trump always chickens out on your tariff threats, and that's why markets are higher this week. What's your response to that?
I kick out?
Chicken out.
Oh, isn't that nice? Chicken out. I've never heard that. You mean because I reduced China from 145% that I set down to 100 and then down to another number? And 6 months ago, this country was stone cold dead. We had a dead country. We had a country people didn't think it was going to survive, and you ask a nasty question like that. It's called negotiation. You set a number, but don't ever say what you said. That's a nasty question. Go ahead. To me, that's a nasty.
He didn't like that question, Lyse, did he?
It must hurt even more because they're Mexican as well. Yeah.
So what is your current impression of President Trump right now, Lyse, in terms of his engagement, his thinking around Ukraine?
Every week, sometimes every day, brings a different stance. We just don't know where he stands. A few weeks ago, he was implying that he was giving President Putin 2 weeks to get back to him about ending the war. He criticized President Putin for absolutely going crazy after those really very, very heavy salvos of drones attacking Kyiv and other cities. And then now his most recent comments are after another telephone call with President Putin lasting more than an hour. And he comes out of it saying, well, it looks like President Putin's going to respond to the Spiderweb attack, not saying anything about, well, both sides have now responded. Let's get back to the negotiating table. Just saying matter-of-factly, well, there will be a response, and saying that his call will not further the process any. And then he said they also talked about the great potential for bilateral cooperation. And Vitaly, I always wonder when they have those conversations, an hour and a half, an hour, how much of it is taken up with President Putin dazzling President Trump about all of the money to be made in mineral exploration, oil and gas, etc., in Russia, and how much of it is
him as well,
and to flatter him. Of course, it has to be, translation. So we just don't know.
It passed a lot of people by, the second phone call. It wasn't discussed in the same kind of way. It didn't have any big headlines that came out of it.
You wonder whether he's just likes talking to President Putin.
Yeah.
Another strongman. And every once in a while, he'll threaten to pull out completely. And then yet again, then he engages. I mean, he had said, I remember I was in the Gulf when President Trump was making his trips, and you were in Istanbul. I was in Abu Dhabi, and there was a discussion, would President Trump add something to his itinerary, and he would go and meet President Putin in Istanbul. And as he got on the plane to go back to America, he said, well, I guess I've got to meet President Putin soon in order to sort this out. And then he added that the Pope might come. So can you make it out?
Well, you say that Trump's rhetoric on Ukraine keeps changing, which is true. The bottom line is that he's not done anything.
Yes.
I honestly look forward to the moment when we'll be talking about what people do rather than what they say or promise or threaten, because there have been so many words that have had no impact on the ground whatsoever.
What are people saying in Ukraine, or what did they say, Paul, about this latest phone call?
I mean, people here are clearly suspicious and anxious about the relationship between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. They, like us, don't really claim to understand that relationship. But they do worry about it. The notion that Donald Trump is now kind of a conduit for Russian threats against Ukraine is obviously a little odd. I think people here slightly rolled their eyes when they hear about Russian retaliation, because let's not forget, the night before Ukraine launched Operation Spiderweb, this country was hit by 472 drones. The use of drones over the skies of Ukraine has escalated dramatically in recent weeks. So the idea that somehow Ukrainian action will be met by retaliation seems somewhat laughable to them. It's clear that Vladimir Putin bent Donald Trump's ear about some other things that happened last weekend. That same day, in fact, there were a series of incidents involving the derailing of Russian trains. There was one in the south, in occupied southern Zaporizhia Oblast, which clearly was a Ukrainian sabotage operation designed to disrupt Russian military supplies. But what I think Mr. Putin was telling Donald Trump about was this incident involving a passenger train that was traveling towards Moscow that collided with a bridge that had just been collapsed. And that is something that Mr. Putin is saying is evidence that Kyiv is a terrorist state and that it is carrying out terrorist actions. We saw that rhetoric in the Kremlin readout of the call, and also in a meeting, a Zoom meeting that President Putin had with his government officials. They are pushing this narrative that Ukraine was responsible for that incident. There is no evidence that Ukraine was responsible for that incident, and it is highly unlikely that Ukraine would carry out operations the result of which could only be the death of Russian civilians. That has no purpose whatsoever. And so I think it is interesting to watch how this incident was described and perhaps utilized by the Kremlin.
A significant moment in Europe this week with the election of a new Polish president, lots of implications potentially for Ukraine and for the conflict. And we had a question from Mark on Discord who asked exactly that. What could happen now? What are the implications of this new conservative president, Karol Nawrocki? It was an incredibly tight result in that poll on Sunday. Lyse, it's partly a ceremonial role, but not when it comes to foreign policy, because he is actually able to block what the Donald Tusk government wants to do. He's got a power of veto.
Yes, and a huge blow to Tusk, who is playing an increasingly pivotal role in all of these efforts to get Europe together to provide a more robust security guarantee for Ukraine. And Poland is one of the countries which is spending now 5% of GDP on its military because it feels the threat from Russia. Now, Nawrocki doesn't speak warmly about Ukraine. He demeans the Ukrainian refugees who are in large numbers in his country. He's made it clear he doesn't want Ukraine to join any of the European institutions. But as far as I know, he hasn't called for ending aid to Ukraine. And it would be a big stretch to say he is pro-Russian. I mean, geography dictates that he isn't. And so he's not going to be cozying up to President Putin, but he certainly, even before he came to power, even as a candidate, he had a photo op with President Trump in the Oval Office, thumbs up, and President Trump gave him the green light.
Yeah, he's a big fan of President Trump.
Yes, big Trump, and he's seen to be in the Trump style. So there's a lot of danger in this mix.
Yeah, is anything that he said, Paul, being picked up, particularly in Ukraine, that they feel concerned about?
Yeah, I think they are, because he bangs on a lot about World War II and alleged Ukrainian genocide against Polish civilians. There are a handful of very notorious episodes during that war in which Polish civilians died at the hands of Ukrainian partisans. And this is interestingly a history, a complex, dark history that Moscow occasionally likes to play with. I remember being here just before the war broke, the full-scale invasion in 2022, and there was a massive hack of the Ukrainian local government networks. And one of the things that popped up on people's screens was some weird references to the difficult, bloody history between Ukraine and Poland. It was a clear attempt to stir up a bad feeling between Poland and Ukraine. And it's not hard to do, because those historical memories are deep and they are bitter. But I think, Lyse is right. I don't think we should necessarily overstate the impact. I think it's going to throw grit in the wheels of the relationship between Poland and Ukraine. Clearly, the relationship between the new president and Donald Trump is a significant one, and it wasn't for nothing that Donald Trump allowed his Homeland Secretary, Kristi Noem, to come to Poland just before the election and give a speech in which he openly endorsed Mr. Nawrocki. So that's going to be an issue, and I suspect what President Zelensky will do, and he congratulated the new president on his victory, will be to treat him rather the way he treats Donald Trump, to get alongside him, to say what he needs to say, to try and flatter him when flattery is worthwhile. Because preserving that relationship, which Donald Tusk has invested so much in, is really, really important. Poland is a major European security player, and it is the conduit, the avenue for the Western military supplies flooding into this country.
Paul, good to have you with us from Kyiv. Thank you. Vitaly, Lyse, lovely to have you with us in the studio.
Thank you.
And thanks so much to you for watching. We will be back, of course, next week with a Q&A episode. But in the meantime, do check out Ukrainecast and our feed. There's plenty more analysis of everything that's happening on the ground, the key moments in the war. We've got big interviews with people and players too on the ground. So if you like the sound of that, just search for Ukrainecast wherever you get your BBC podcasts. Also make sure that you click on that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode.
Ukrainecast from BBC News.